Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Hello everybody, we at Rouse IAS have come up with the answer key for the GS Paper 1 Prelims 2020. Most of you must have observed that the prelims this year was comparatively tougher. Now the cutoff mark for a candidate belonging to general category in the prelims 2019 was around 98 marks. Considering the fact that the prelims this year was tougher as compared to the previous year, we do believe that the cutoff would be in the range of 90 to 95 marks. So, if you are able to score more than 90, then you should end all your speculation as to whether you will be clearing the prelims or not. You should end this particular speculation and right away get down to the mains preparation. So go to the answer key, the link for which has been provided in the description box below. Match your answers with the answer key. Try to find out as to what is your score. And if you are able to score more than 90, right away start your mains preparation. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now the first article appears on page number 1. This article highlights that this year's Nobel Prize in the field of medicine has been awarded to 3 scientists. These 3 scientists are Mr. Harvey J. Alter, Michael Houghton and Charles M. Rice. These 3 scientists have been given the Nobel Prize in the field of medicine for the discovery and identification of the virus that causes the hepatitis C. Hepatitis C is a viral disease that causes the inflammation of the liver cells. It damages the liver and in some of the extreme cases it can lead to the liver cirrhosis. Hepatitis C affects almost 70 million people across the world and it is also considered to be a common cause for the liver transplantation. Hence, the contribution of these 3 scientists is considered to be quite significant because first and foremost they have identified as to which is the virus responsible for causing the hepatitis C. Secondly, their contribution has in turn enabled us to come out with the treatments to counter the hepatitis C. Now the article that we are going to discuss here is quite important because a rated question on the hepatitis has already been asked in the prelims 2019. Accordingly, the various dimensions that we would be discussing in this particular video analysis is first and foremost, we'll understand the hepatitis and its different types. Secondly, we'll understand the contribution and significance of the Nobel laureates of the discovery and identification of the hepatitis C virus, which ultimately led to the recognition of their efforts in the form of the Nobel Prize in the field of medicine. And as a last dimension, we'll discuss certain basic aspects about the Nobel Prizes, wherein we shall be discussing as to which all categories of Nobel Prizes are awarded each year, then who awards the Nobel Prizes and so on. Before going to the analysis of this particular article, I suggest you to test yourself through these questions. The liver is considered to be one of the most important organ in the body. The liver produces bile, which is quite important for carrying away the waste materials and for breaking down of the fat. The liver detoxifies the blood. It helps in breaking down of alcohol and medicines. It produces proteins and cholesterol for carrying the fats within the body. It destroys the old RBCs and so on. So hepatitis is a disease that affects the functioning of the liver. Under hepatitis, there is an inflammation of the liver cells, there is a damage to the liver, and in some of the extreme cases, it can even lead to liver cirrhosis or the liver cancer. The hepatitis can be caused due to different types of viruses, in which case we call it as a viral hepatitis. It can be caused due to the consumption of toxic substances such as alcohol as well as drugs. It can be caused due to the autoimmune disorder. Under the autoimmune hepatitis, the immune system of the body starts targeting the liver by considering it as a foreign body. Now, depending upon which virus causes the hepatitis and how it is being transmitted, we have broadly 2 categories of the viral hepatitis: epidemic hepatitis and the serum hepatitis. Epidemic hepatitis, as the name suggests, is a hepatitis that has been caused due to a virus that is transmitted through the contaminated food and water, and such kind of virus is usually prevalent in the areas with poor sanitation. Both hepatitis A as well as hepatitis E are considered to be the epidemic hepatitis. The epidemic hepatitis usually have a short incubation period. Characteristic feature of this epidemic hepatitis is it is an acute illness which is followed by the lifelong immunity. Some of the symptoms here include fever, loss of appetite, dark color urine, jaundice, etc. Please do note that presently we do have both treatment as well as vaccine for hepatitis A as well as hepatitis E. With respect to serum hepatitis, as the name suggests, the serum hepatitis is a hepatitis that is caused due to the contact with the infected blood, semen, or the other bodily fluid of a person who has been infected with hepatitis. So, in a way, the transmission mode of the serum hepatitis is similar to the transmission mode of HIV. So, the serum hepatitis can be transmitted through sharing of needles, syringes, vertical transmission from mother to child, sexual transmission, and so on. So hepatitis B, C, D are considered to be the serum hepatitis. Now, even though hepatitis B, C, and D are transmitted through a similar mode, but the virus which causes these three different types of hepatitis is quite different. So the virus which causes hepatitis B is different from the virus which causes hepatitis C, and the virus which causes hepatitis C is different from the virus that causes hepatitis D. Unlike the epidemic hepatitis where the incubation period is shorter, in case of the serum hepatitis, the incubation period is much longer, and in large number of cases the infection becomes chronic, which in some of the cases can lead to liver failure as well as liver cancer. The symptoms of the serum hepatitis is similar to the symptoms as observed in the epidemic hepatitis. As far as the hepatitis B and hepatitis D is concerned, a person can be infected with hepatitis D only when he is infected with hepatitis B. In a way, a person cannot be infected with hepatitis D unless he is infected with hepatitis B. So, the treatment as well as vaccine for hepatitis B as well as D is similar. So, if you want to provide a vaccine against hepatitis D, then a person has to be given a vaccine against hepatitis B. So, vaccine against hepatitis B will act against both hepatitis B as well as hepatitis D. As far as hepatitis C is concerned, as of now we do have only the treatment wherein the patient can be treated through various antiviral medicines. However, as far as the vaccine is concerned, so far we have not been able to come out with a vaccine to counter the hepatitis C virus. At the start of our discussion, as highlighted, Harvey Alter, Michael Houghton, Charles M. Rice have been awarded the Nobel Prize in the field of medicine for their discovery and identification of the hepatitis C virus. So let us try to understand as to what factors led to the discovery and identification of the hepatitis C virus, their contribution, and the significance of their contribution. Now suppose say there are two persons, person A and person B. Person A is a patient here, whereas person B is a blood donor. During the course of the surgery, person A, that is a patient here, may be in the need of a blood, and the person B may be willing to donate his blood. The person B here could be a healthy person, but at the same time, he could be a carrier of a serum hepatitis. That is, he could be a carrier of virus that causes hepatitis B, C or D. So the virus which causes these types of hepatitis may be found in his blood. So if such a blood donor donates his blood to the patient A, then there is a greater risk of transmitting the hepatitis from person B to person A through the process of the blood transfusion. So what should we do in order to avoid the risk of transmitting the hepatitis through the blood transfusion? See, first and foremost, we have to identify as to which is the virus that is responsible for causing each of these hepatitis. That is the virus responsible for causing hepatitis B, C and D. Secondly, whenever the blood transfusion takes place, we have to ensure that the donor in this particular case is not only healthy, but he is not a carrier of each of these hepatitis. So at the global level, if you have to reduce the risk of transmitting the hepatitis virus, first and foremost, we have to discover and identify various viruses responsible for each of these hepatitis. And secondly, we will have to come out with a diagnostic test in order to ensure that the virus does not get transmitted through the process of the blood transfusion. So for the first time, well-renowned scientist Mr. Baruch Blumberg discovered and identified the virus which is responsible for causing hepatitis B in the year 1960. Subsequently, in the year 1976, Baruch Blumberg was awarded the Nobel Prize in the field of physiology or the medicine. So the Nobel Prize which has been awarded now, it is not the first Nobel Prize which has been awarded with respect to significant contribution in the field of hepatitis. The first Nobel Prize was awarded to Baruch Blumberg in the year 1976, and the second Nobel Prize in the field of contribution to the hepatitis has been awarded now. So first and foremost, in the year 1960, Mr. Baruch Blumberg discovered as to which is the virus which is responsible for causing the hepatitis B. This led to the development of the diagnostic test in order to determine the presence of the hepatitis B virus. This significantly reduced the risk of the transmission of the disease through the blood transfusion. Now, the development of these diagnostic tests should have significantly brought down the transmission of the hepatitis virus through the process of the blood transfusion. In spite of this, scientists came to know that almost 80% of the cases with respect to hepatitis were caused due to the blood transfusion. So this clearly shows that apart from hepatitis B, there may be other forms of unknown viruses that may be getting transmitted through the blood transfusion and hence may be responsible for causing hepatitis. So the task which was cut out before Mr. Harvey Alter, Michael Houghton and Charles M. Rice was to discover and identify this blood-borne virus that has been causing a new form of hepatitis and also provide evidences in their support. In this regard, Mr. Harvey Alter, first and foremost, he showed that there is an unknown virus which is responsible for causing the chronic hepatitis, and this unknown virus is different from the hepatitis B virus. Michael Houghton isolated the genome of the new virus, and later on this new virus was renamed as the hepatitis C virus. Charles M. Rice showed evidence that hepatitis C virus alone could cause the hepatitis. So the significance of their contribution lies in the fact that first and foremost, it led to the development of the sensitive blood test in order to determine the presence of the hepatitis C virus. It eliminated the risk of infection that may arise on account of the blood transfusion. It led to the development of the strong antiviral treatments which has been able to cure almost up to 95% of the patients across the world. So thanks to their contribution, hepatitis C is now curable and millions of people across the world have got benefited due to their contribution. In spite of this, a number of concerns still remain with respect to tackling the hepatitis C. These concerns have been highlighted in a report published by the World Health Organization in the year 2017. This report was titled as the Global Hepatitis Report. The first concern here is, in spite of the availability of the treatment, we have so far not been able to find a vaccine for the hepatitis C. Only around 20% of the people who have been infected with the hepatitis C virus have been diagnosed. So this clearly shows that there is poor coverage with respect to diagnosis of the people who have been infected with the hepatitis C virus. So the remaining 80% of the people may be infected with the hepatitis C virus, but these people as such may not be aware of their infection. Thirdly, in spite of the fact that we have been able to come out with strong antiviral treatments, the treatment cost as such is considered to be quite prohibitive and hence considered to be disadvantageous to the people living in the lower strata of the society. Now coming to some of the important details about the Nobel Prizes. Alfred Nobel, who was born in the 19th century in Stockholm, was considered to be one of the most successful chemists, inventor as well as businessman. He invented dynamite, artificial silk as well as the first aluminium boat in the world. However, his invention of the dynamite is considered to be one of the most important inventions because it enabled him to become the most wealthiest man in Europe. However, his invention of dynamite was vehemently criticized because dynamite as such was not only used in mining but it also came to be used in warfare, which subsequently led to the death of a large number of people. So accordingly, in the year 1895, Mr. Alfred Nobel wrote a will. In his will, he wrote that whatever money he has earned, all that money would go into a separate dedicated fund. The yearly interest on that dedicated fund will be in turn set aside for awarding 5 individuals across the world who have been able to provide for the greatest benefit for the mankind. The Nobel Prizes are awarded on December 10th every year. The date December 10 is so chosen because it was on this particular date in the year 1896 Alfred Nobel had passed away. So according to Mr. Alfred Nobel's will, the prizes which are required to be announced include 5 prizes, which included physics, chemistry, physiology or medicine, as well as peace. Later on, an additional award for the economic sciences was introduced in the year 1969. So originally the will provided for the 5 Nobel Prizes, but later on the additional award for the economic prizes was also introduced. Now there are multiple institutions involved in the awarding of the Nobel Prizes according to the will provided by the Alfred Nobel. The Nobel Foundation has been set up in order to carry out the provisions of his will as well as to administer the funds. Apart from that, in his will he had stipulated that 4 different institutions, 3 from Sweden and 1 from Norway, would award these prizes. As far as Sweden is concerned, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences would award the Nobel Prizes for physics, chemistry as well as economics. Karolinska Institute would give away the Nobel Prize in the field of physiology or medicine, while the Nobel Prize in the field of literature would be given by the Swedish Academy. In case of Norway, the Norwegian Nobel Committee, which is selected by the Norwegian Parliament, is entrusted with the responsibility of giving away the Nobel Prize in the field of peace. Some of the Indian Nobel laureates who had Indian citizenship include Mr. Rabindranath Tagore, C.V. Raman, Mother Teresa, Amartya Sen, Kailash Satyarthi, etc. Apart from these Nobel laureates, we also have other Nobel laureates who were born in India but citizens of other countries, such as Mr. Hargobind Khurana, Mr. Venkatraman Ramakrishnan, Abhijit Banerjee, and so on. So this is what you have to know with respect to this particular article. The response to the questions that were posed at the start of our discussion has been presented on your screen. As far as the answer to question number 8 and 9 is concerned, I would want you to find out the answers to these questions on your own and respond in the comments section. Let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 6 in the form of a lead article. The article is important from the perspective of polity and governance. I hope all of you must be aware that the Indian Parliament has recently passed the 3 farm bills in order to give the necessary freedom to the farmers to sell their agricultural produce to whomsoever and wherever they would want to. Now the passage of these 3 farm bills has been opposed by the farmers and traders. It has also been opposed by a number of state governments. The farmers and traders are opposing these 3 farm bills because they believe that these 3 farm bills would lead to their exploitation. It will expose the Indian agriculture to multinational companies. On the other hand, the states are opposing these 3 farm bills because they believe that these 3 farm bills encroach upon their legislative powers and they go against the federal spirit of the Indian Constitution. Now the various problems and concerns that have been raised with the 3 farm bills has been discussed by us comprehensively in our DNS dated 17th of September 2020. Now this particular lead article is specific to various constitutional and legal challenges that have arisen over the 3 farm bills. Accordingly, we shall be discussing the center-state legislative relations, then the legal controversy which has arisen over the farm bills, and various concerns which have been raised in this particular article. Now, based upon a video analysis, a mains question for the practice has been displayed on your screen. Before understanding the legal and the constitutional challenges that have arisen over the passage of the 3 farm bills, let us first understand certain basics related to the center-state legislative relations. Understanding these basics is quite important to understand as to how the passage of the 3 farm bills has affected the federal structure. As you all must be aware, India is a federal country. Accordingly, the Indian Constitution has provided for the distribution of legislative, executive and the financial powers. The distribution of the legislative powers has been provided between Article 245 to Article 255 of the Indian Constitution. The Schedule 7 of the Indian Constitution has basically provided for 3 lists, that is the Union list, State list and the concurrent list, in order to provide for the distribution of the legislative powers between the Union and the states. The Union list, which is also referred to as List 1, consists of almost around 100 subjects. Some of the subjects included under the Union list include defense, atomic energy, coinage, banking, external affairs, railways, etc. We have almost around 61 subjects under the state list. These subjects include public order, police, public health and sanitation, agriculture, and so on. We have 52 subjects under the concurrent list. Some of these subjects include education, forest, marriage and divorce, economic and social planning, labor, criminal law procedure, civil procedure, etc. For the subjects which are placed under the union list, only the Parliament of India can make laws. For the subjects placed under the state list, only the state legislature can make laws. For the subjects which are placed under the concurrent list, both the Parliament as well as state legislature can make laws. However, in event of a conflict between a law which has been made by the Parliament and the law made by the state legislature, the law made by the Parliament shall prevail upon the law made by the state legislature. So the Indian Constitution has clearly given a primacy of the union law over the central law for the subjects which are placed under the concurrent list. So in a way, this particular feature of the Indian Constitution can be considered as a unitary feature. Apart from that, under certain exceptional circumstances, the Parliament of India can make laws on the subjects which are placed under the state list. For example, the Parliament can make laws related to the Indian agriculture in accordance with Article 249, Article 250, 252 or 253. As far as Article 249 is concerned, the Rajya Sabha passes a resolution stating that it is necessary in the national interest that the Parliament should make law on a subject placed under the state list, then the Parliament becomes competent to make law on a matter placed under the state list. Similarly, the Parliament can make laws on the state list during the course of the national emergency. Under Article 252 of the Indian Constitution, two or more states can pass a resolution and request the Parliament to make law on a particular subject placed under the state list. Automatically, in such cases, the law can be made by the Parliament. However, such a law passed by the Indian Parliament would be applicable to only those states that have passed a resolution asking the Parliament to pass the law. Under Article 253, the Parliament can also make a law on a subject placed under the state list in order to implement some international agreement. For example, let's say we have a WTO agreement on agriculture which requires to be implemented. Now, to implement this international agreement, the Parliament can make law on this agriculture subject even though the agriculture subject has been placed under the state list. Now, coming to legal controversy over the farm bills. Now, if you look at agriculture and associated activities such as agriculture trade, agriculture commerce, marketing, etc., the reference to agriculture and associated activities is found in both state list as well as a concurrent list. For example, under state list, we have multiple entries dealing with various aspects of Indian agriculture, including the marketing of the agricultural produce. Entry 14 is a much broader and a comprehensive entry under the state list dealing with all the aspects of the agriculture. Entry 26 provides for the trade and commerce within the state. Entry 27 provides for production, supply and distribution of the agricultural goods. Entry 28 provides for the regulation of markets and fairs within the states. So since all of these four entries are provided under the state list, the state legislature has a prerogative or the power to make laws related to agriculture, including the marketing of the agricultural produce. So just like how we have entries under the state list dealing with the marketing of the agricultural produce, we do have such an entry even in the concurrent list as well. We have the entry 33 in the concurrent list, which has been inserted through the third Constitutional Amendment Act, and this entry also provides for the trade and commerce of the agricultural commodities. So if you look at entry 33, the entry 33 was not originally provided under the Indian Constitution. It was subsequently added in the year 1954 through the third Constitutional Amendment. It provides for the regulation of trade and commerce in terms of production, distribution and supply of various products wherein the industries is being controlled by the center. For example, if you look at defense, the defense is a subject which has been placed under the union list, and accordingly under entry 33, the central government can regulate production, distribution and supply of the defense commodities. The central government can also regulate the production and distribution of foodstuffs, including edible oil seeds and oils. The other commodities whose production and distribution can be regulated by the center through a law include the cattle fodder, raw cotton, and the cotton seed. So, in accordance with the multiple entries provided under the state list, various state governments in case of India have enacted their APMC acts in order to regulate the marketing of the agricultural produce. However, as discussed in our previous DNS video, the APMC Act in case of India is considered to be highly restrictive in nature. Under the APMC Act, there are a number of restrictions on the farmers as to where the agricultural produce can be sold, to whom the agricultural produce can be sold, etc. For example, under some of the APMC Acts, the farmers cannot sell their agricultural produce outside the existing APMCs. The farmers are not allowed to sell the agricultural produce directly to the exporters, processors, or to the end consumer. Even the perishable commodities such as fruits and vegetables as well have to be compulsorily sold through the APMCs only. Now we have to understand that these kind of restrictions on the marketing of agricultural produce is quite unique in case of India. This is so because if you look at the manufacturing sector, in case of manufacturing sector, there is no such restrictions on the industries as to where they can sell their industrial products or to whom they have to sell their industrial products. The manufacturing sector in case of India has complete flexibility as well as freedom to decide as to where it wants to sell the industrial products, to whom it wants to sell the industrial products. If it wants, it can even export the industrial products. So we have given the complete freedom as well as flexibility to the industries. Sadly, the farmers in case of India do not enjoy the same freedom and flexibility as enjoyed by the industries. Hence, in order to do away with such kind of restrictive regime put under the APMC Acts of the state government, the government of India has introduced the 3 farm bills. Now these 3 farm bills basically enable the farmers to sell his agricultural produce to whomsoever and wherever he would want to. So a farmer based in Karnataka, he can decide to sell his agricultural produce in Karnataka itself. He can decide to sell his produce in the state of Maharashtra, where he may feel that he is likely to get higher prices. The farmer can directly sell his produce to the customer. The farmer based in Karnataka can also decide to export his agricultural produce. So the idea behind the 3 farm bills is to give you necessary freedom to the farmers to sell his agricultural produce and get the remunerative prices. Now, in order to pass the 3 bills, the union government has invoked entry 33 provided under the concurrent list. Now, if you look at entry 26 and entry 27 provided under the state list, both these entries enable the state governments to regulate the marketing of agricultural produce. But in these 2 entries, it has been clearly stated that the law made by the state legislature would be subject to the provisions of the entry 33 in the list 3, which means to say if there is a law made by the parliament by invoking entry 33 of the concurrent list, then such a parliamentary law would have a prevailing effect over the existing law made by the state legislature. So for the marketing of agricultural produce, we have the APMC Act formulated by the state government and the 3 farm bills which have been passed by the parliament. But the Indian Constitution says that if there is a parliamentary law which is made by invoking entry 33 of the concurrent list, such a parliamentary law will have a prevailing effect over the law which has been made under both entry 26 as well as entry 27 under the state list. Now the author of this particular article highlights that the passage of the 3 farm bills by the union government does not stand the legal scrutiny and is against the federal spirit of the Indian Constitution. So let us understand the concerns raised in this particular article one by one. First and foremost, the author in this particular article highlights that entry 33 in the concurrent list, which was used to formulate the 3 farm bills, this is against the spirit of Article 369 of the Indian Constitution. Article 369 of the Indian Constitution provides for a temporary power to the Indian Parliament to make laws on the matters placed under the state list. Now, for these matters, the Parliament can make laws as if these matters are placed under the concurrent list. So, just like how the Parliament can make a law for a subject placed under the concurrent list, similarly, the Parliament can make law for a subject placed under the state list. However, this is a temporary power because This power was applicable to the Indian Parliament only for a period of 5 years in order to regulate trade and commerce within the states. The founding fathers of the Indian Constitution had provided for the Article 369 because after India's independence, a number of states were deficient in the food production. So, Article 369 in a way enabled the central government to ensure that there are no restrictions with respect to food movement across India, to ensure that there are no restrictions with respect to movement of food grains from one state to another. Thus, Article 369 in a way empowered the Parliament to make a law in order to provide for free flow of food grains across the state and ensure the food security even in the poorer states. So, if you look at the spirit behind Article 369 of the Indian Constitution, the spirit here was the Parliament should regulate the trade in the agricultural commodities across India. However, this power of the Parliament should be temporary in nature. Ultimately, after a period of 5 years, the power to regulate trade and commerce with respect to agricultural commodities should be exercised by the state governments and not the central government. But eventually, what happened was in the year 1954, the then government of the day added entry 33 into the concurrent list. This entry was added to the Third Constitutional Amendment Act. Now, through the entry 33 in the Indian Constitution, now the Parliament can regulate the trade and commerce of the foodstuffs, including edible oilseeds as well as oils. So, if you look at the spirit behind Article 369, the spirit was to give temporary powers to the Parliament for a period of 5 years to regulate the trade and commerce of the agricultural commodities. But now what entry 33 has done is, it has changed this temporary provision into a permanent provision where the Parliament can anytime, whenever it decides, can make a law in order to regulate trade and commerce of the agricultural commodities. Hence, the author of this particular article highlights that invoking entry 33 of the concurrent list to pass the farm bills is adventurism. It would lead to erosion of autonomy of the states and hence weaken the federal structure. Secondly, the author of this particular states that the three farm bills would not stand the legal scrutiny. This he says on the basis of the Supreme Court judgment in the ITC Limited versus the APMC 2002. In this particular case, the Supreme Court of India had ruled that market fee can be charged under the state APMC Act. Secondly, the state law on a subject placed under the concurrent list will become void only when the center and states have made laws on the same subject matter. In that case, the central law will prevail upon the state law. This is what we have discussed earlier as well. Thirdly, it has stated that for the subjects which lie outside the list 3, one would have to look at the exclusive entry in order to determine as to whether the Indian Parliament or the state legislature can make law on such an exclusive list. Now, as discussed before, entry 14 under the state list is a list of agriculture, and this is much wider as well as comprehensive, encompassing all the activities related to the agriculture. Now, based upon the entry 14 provided under the state list, the author of this particular article highlights that agriculture as such is exclusively a state subject. And since it is a state subject, agriculture marketing falls completely under the purview of the state government and not under the purview of the center. Apart from that, taking a cue from the Supreme Court judgment in the ITC Limited case, the state governments can still impose and collect the market fee under their respective APMC acts. Thirdly, if you have a look at entry 26 and entry 27, both these entries say that they are subject to provisions of entry 33 of the concurrent list. However, entry 28 is a standalone provision and this is not subjected to entry 33 of the concurrent list. So the entry 28 in the state list deals with markets and fairs within the states, and as discussed before, this is not subjected to the entry 33 in the concurrent list, which once again tells us that legally it is the state legislature which is empowered to make laws, policies and regulations related to the agricultural market. And such a law made by the state legislature would not have any overriding provision of the law made by invoking entry 33. So you have to understand that all of the arguments which we have discussed here, these are the arguments which are put forth by the author of this particular article. So even today there is lack of legal clarity as to whether the parliament is empowered to make a law related to the marketing of the agricultural produce. However, if you look at the entry 33 provided under the concurrent list, by looking at this particular entry, we can clearly come to a conclusion that the parliament as such is well within its power to make a law in order to regulate the marketing of agricultural produce. So in order to avoid such kind of confusion, the Ashok Dalwai Committee on Doubling of Farmers' Income has clearly recommended that we need to place agricultural marketing as a subject explicitly under the concurrent list. So this will remove all the confusion related to who can regulate the agriculture marketing produce. Apart from that, as far as the present status of these three farm bills is concerned, whether do they violate the federal structure of the Indian constitution or not, does it encroach upon the powers of state government or not? Now all of these matters have to be decided by the Supreme Court if at all a case is filed before it. The next article appears on page number 10. In what can be considered as a major technological breakthrough, the DRDO has recently successfully test-fired the Smart Torpedo system. Hence, let us understand the working mechanism of the Smart Torpedo system and what advantages it would have over the existing torpedo system. Now, if you look at torpedoes, torpedoes are considered to be the underwater weapons which are usually used to target the enemy submarines. These torpedoes can be launched from either above or below the water surface. From above the water surface, they can be launched by using the aircraft carriers or the warships, and from below the water surface, they can be launched by using the submarines. Now, the problem with the existing torpedoes is that when they are launched with the submarines, they do have a very limited range of around 50 km. Apart from that, they do travel very slowly, and because of their limited range and their slower speed, they can easily be detected by the enemy submarines. On the other hand, if you look at the Smart Torpedo system that has been successfully been tested by DRDO, the word SMART here stands for Missile Assisted Release of Lightweight Anti-Submarine Torpedo System. So in simple words, this is basically a torpedo which is released by using the supersonic missiles, and these torpedoes are basically used to target the submarines. So if you look at the Smart Torpedo system, once fired, the entire weapon system flies like a supersonic missile in air at low altitudes. Once it reaches the target, the missile ejects the torpedo into the water. The torpedo then tries to find out the exact location of the enemy submarine. Once the location is found, the torpedo starts moving towards the submarine and finally destroys it. So it's basically a combination of missile as well as torpedo, wherein basically the torpedoes get released through the assistance of the supersonic missiles. Now if you look at the working mechanism of the Smart Torpedo system, the Smart Torpedo system, as you can see in this particular diagram, they are usually launched from the warships in the oceans. So the torpedoes, once they are launched, they take off like a regular supersonic missile. Most of the journey is covered in air at low altitudes. They are in turn linked to the warship through the two-way communication. So during their journey, as such, they are guided towards the enemy submarine. So just when it approaches close enough to the submerged submarine, the torpedo enters into the water, tries to find out the exact location of the submarine. Then the torpedo starts moving towards the submarine and finally attacks it. Now the Smart Torpedo system is considered to be much better over the existing torpedo system because the Smart Torpedo system is much more faster as well as stealthier. Hence, it becomes quite difficult to be detected by the enemy submarines. Apart from that, if you look at the range of the Smart Torpedo system, according to DRDO, it can achieve a range of as high as 600 km. So because of its high range, it is being said that India has been able to showcase its technological capability with respect to the anti-submarine warfare. So this is what you have to know with respect to the Smart Torpedo system. The onset of winter in northern India usually coincides with the growing air pollution on account of stubble burning. In this regard, the Chief Minister of Delhi, Mr. Arvind Kejriwal, has launched a new anti-pollution campaign. This anti-pollution campaign focuses on a number of measures such as anti-dust measures, management of the hotspots where the air pollution is likely to be higher, devising a war room against pollution, tree transplantation policy, etc. However, one of the most important action taken as part of this anti-pollution campaign is the action against the stubble burning through the free distribution of the Pusa biodecomposer capsules to the farmers. It is to be noted that even the Union Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has been advocating for the usage of Pusa decomposer capsules in order to better manage the stubble burning. So in this regard, this particular topic of Pusa biodecomposer capsules become quite important. So let us understand as to what exactly are these capsules, how do they work, and what are their benefits. We do know that in case of North India, once the paddy is harvested, the amount of time which is left for sowing of wheat is quite lower. So most of the farmers go for the burning of the paddy straw, leading to increase in the stubble burning incidents as well as increase in the air pollution. So in a way, the Pusa decomposer capsules can be considered as eco-friendly and environmentally sustainable method in order to tackle the air pollution that occurs due to the stubble burning. So the biodecomposer capsules, they actually degrade the paddy straws in the field itself and they convert them into compost in a rapid manner. So whatever is the limited time duration between the harvest of the paddy and the growing of wheat, within this limited time duration, the decomposer capsules can convert the paddy straw into compost. Now these decomposer capsules have come into being on account of the research undertaken by the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. Now these decomposer capsules contain 7 different types of fungi. These fungi as such produces essential enzymes which in turn lead to the degradation of the paddy straw in a rapid manner. These decomposer capsules need to be mixed with water, 150 grams of jaggery and 50 grams of besan. So in a way, in order to degrade paddy straw in almost 1 hectare of agricultural land, one would need almost up to 25 liters of such a mixture. This mixture is allowed to ferment, and once it is fermented, it is later sprayed on the paddy straw, ultimately converting it into compost in a rapid manner. Now, there are a number of benefits associated with these decomposer capsules. First and foremost, they reduce the air pollution that may arise on account of the stubble burning. It is considered to be much cheaper. For example, 1 capsule is worth 5 rupees. So if a farmer wants to degrade the paddy straw in 1 hectare of agricultural land, he would need only up to rupees 20. It is considered to be eco-friendly and environmentally sustainable technique. And thirdly, since it converts the paddy straw into compost, it also enhances the overall fertility as well as the productivity of the soil. Now, the next article appears on page number 4. Now, this particular article highlights that the total value of the ecosystem services provided by the National Zoological Park located in New Delhi is as high as around rupees 55,000 crores. Now, if you look at the ecosystem as such provides a number of benefits for the mankind. It provides for the biodiversity conservation. It helps in the carbon storage and carbon sequestration. It helps in the purification of the water and so on. However, we do not know the economic or the market value of these services provided by the ecosystem. So if you try to calculate the market value of the services provided by the ecosystem, then it will help us appreciate the benefits bestowed upon us by the nature. Calculation of the ecosystem services would help us make much better decisions while dealing with the environment. For example, the value of the ecosystem services can be taken into account by us in order to give the environmental clearances. So knowing the value of the ecosystem services can be considered to be an integral part of promotion of the sustainable development. In this regard, the Central Zoo Authority, working under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, had earlier requested the Energy and the Resource Institute to carry out a study in order to ascertain the total value of the ecosystem services provided by the National Zoological Park located in New Delhi. Now, this was considered to be first of its kind of study in order to ascertain or calculate the value of the ecosystem services provided by a zoological park. The total economic value of the ecosystem services provided by the Delhi Zoo was estimated to be as high as around rupees 55,000 crores. See, according to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which is considered to be a major United Nations sponsored effort, this has identified basically 4 types of ecosystem services. These 4 types are provisioning services, regulating services, cultural services, and the supporting services. Provisioning services can be considered to be any kind of benefit for the mankind that can be extracted from the nature. So the provisioning services of the ecosystem include food, drinking water, timber, wood fuel, natural gas, oils, medicines, etc. The regulating services provided by the ecosystem can be considered to be the services that moderate the natural phenomena. So the ecosystem provides many of the basic services that make life possible for the people on earth. For example, the plants clean air and filter water, bacteria decomposes the waste, bees pollinate the flowers, trees hold the soil in place in order to prevent the soil erosion. So all of these processes work together in order to make the ecosystem clean, sustainable, functional, and resilient to change. So the regulating services here include pollination, decomposition, water purification, erosion and flood control, carbon storage, climate regulation, and so on. With respect to the cultural services can be considered to be a non-material benefit that accrues to the human beings because of the nature. Now, for example, music, art, and architecture can take inspiration from the nature. So the cultural services provided by the ecosystem helps in overall development and cultural advancement of the civilization. Lastly, the supporting services can be considered to be the underlying natural processes that makes it possible for the ecosystem to provide for provisioning, regulating, as well as the cultural services. So without the supporting services, the ecosystem will not be in a position to provide these 3 types of services. So some of the supporting services include photosynthesis, the process of nutrient cycling, the creation of soils, water cycle, etc. So the supporting services in a way enable the earth to sustain the basic life forms. So if you look at the question that was asked in prelims 2012, the question here was, which among the 4 categories here is considered as a supporting services? As we have discussed, nutrient cycling is considered to be a supporting service. If you look at the maintenance of biodiversity is considered as a cultural service. So accordingly, the answer in this particular case would be C, that is nutrient cycling and crop pollination. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day.